Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Well, wait a minute, it's December. Gotta turn on the fireplace. There we go. See, you gotta have your fireplace going. So I am 3 days into my 2-week fast. So forgive me if I forget anything or use ums or ahs, but this is the worst day of that long-term fast. Always hard to push through. Just bone broth and water for me and some coffee. You're not supposed to drink that much coffee on a fast, but fuck it, you have to do something. All right, we have 15 minutes, but I want to make a quick video talk about a topic and concept that we've been working together on and talking about for a while that I think is very important. So I'm going to share my screen a bit. Let's see here. Present. Share screen. Wow! There we go. Okay. So when I was at Stanford for the blockchain conference there, the science of blockchain, they had a lovely presentation from Sam Warner's team at ICL and Cornell. And it was an SOK paper on decentralized finance. And it kind of covered some foundational definitions of DeFi and the different types of primitives of DeFi. So smart contracts and keepers and oracles and governance, different DeFi protocols, on-chain asset exchanges, lending, stablecoins, portfolio management, derivatives, and so forth. And it led me to think a little bit about how do we come up with a better term for useful DeFi. So let's do a whiteboard video and let's talk a little bit about that, because I want to talk about basically a concept called, hang on a second. Well, that's not working. Let's unplug it and plug it back in. There we go. Just a moment. There we go. Okay, so we'll zoom in a bit. My pad died on me. All right. Well, that's concerning. Just a moment. I guess what we're going to have to do is stop sharing the screen and go back to my whiteboard. Who says I don't have technical difficulties from time to time? That's okay. But anyway, what I wanted to do was I wanted to make a video talk a little bit about DeFi and its translation into a new concept called RealFi. So we're going to format the background. We're going to enhance the ink shapes. We're going to put a graph in. And just not working. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to have to reset the setup. So I'll just explain it verbally. So DeFi and RealFi, what is the difference between the two? RealFi is DeFi as a superset. So if you take a look at the SOK paper that I just presented, and I'll put it in the comments, basically what they do is they say, hey, these are some categories, these are different use cases, but there's something that's missing from DeFi, and that is really 5 categories. So there are 4 categories and a meta category that fits over it. So there's identity, metadata, governance, standards and certification, and then when you put them all together, you have some notion of a regulatory structure that sits on top of that. So RealFi succinctly is DeFi with identity. Okay, and we're going to talk about each of these things. That's why I wanted to do the whiteboard video. But it's identity. So basically, the dApps themselves have some agency. So the application running on the blockchain has some notion of an identifier. And then the people interfacing with it have some notion of identity. It's not necessarily a real life identity, but it's enough identity to be able to say this is a unique individual and they're distinct and different from someone else. And identity doesn't have to be a universal concept in that everybody in the network knows that identity. It can be completely anonymous to a random person, but to a specific person, that identity is known. Metadata is saying, okay, we're going to tell a little bit of a story about the nature of the people, the funds that are in the account, the story behind them, the transaction that goes into the smart contract or into the DEX or whatever it is. We're going to know a little bit about that. Governance is basically how do we upgrade, update, and change the DeFi that exists. So when you have a DEX or you have a stable coin or an Oracle, for example, JED, version 1.1, version 1.2, version 1.3, how do you upgrade? How do you make those changes? Who gets to decide? What's the process to decide those types of things? And then when we talk about standards and certification, it's saying, okay, are there abstractions about how to do certain things in the DeFi that are industry accepted practices, whether that be standards for bridges, standards for market making, standards for asset issuance and representations, standards for data that's produced and how that data is stored, et cetera, et cetera. And then a regulatory structure is basically the thing that sits on top of that. And it is scoped to a jurisdiction or jurisdictions relevant to where the assets live and the commerce being conducted by those actors. So a lot of people are saying, well, regulation is coming for DeFi. And that's true. The problem the regulators have is how do you automate it and keep it decentralized? So DeFi going to RealFi has those four properties: identity, metadata, governance, standards, and certification. But then it has this concept of decentralized regulation, DREG. So there's some RegTech technology that can be put in where you don't have to change the underlying protocols. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't have to change itself. Ethereum doesn't have to change itself. But there's some overlay where you can apply a regulatory scheme. And some basic capabilities of regulation are things like transaction reversals, freezing, things like being able to identify the actors involved and go through know your customer and anti-money laundering and these types of things. So whoever can solve this, I think, is going to control the entire DeFi space. RealFi is the next generation of DeFi. And I'll do a series on it at some point. And I'm sorry my whiteboard is down right now. I'm not sure what happened to it. But basically, this is the crux of what makes DeFi work for everybody. Now, there's one last part of RealFi. It's kind of a meta part of RealFi, which is the user base. Now, one of the things that I've always been bothered about by the DeFi revolution was it was a bunch of degen yield farmers who'd come in and they're embracing Ponzi-nomics and they're always looking for the greater fool. They have no intention of doing real loans or real transactions. It's just looking for some money to make with DeFi at someone else's expense. So it's a sum-zero game. You win, someone loses. RealFi, the reason why we call it real, is beyond the fact that you have identity and metadata and governance and standards and this regulatory oversight. The people who use it, they use it as their primary financial stack. They don't have a bank account. They don't have credit cards, or that's not a primary concern. It's a secondary concern. They want to use a blockchain-based, cryptocurrency-based financial stack. It's RealFi. You say, well, who would do that? Well, let's imagine. Let's say that you are a small business in Nairobi. And right now, when you interface with the TradFi marketplace, every time you want to get a loan, every time you want to get new inventory for your store, every time you want to get a little bit of capital, store a little bit of capital, there's a 5%, 10%, 15%, 20% fee. And in some cases, you have no access. They just won't give it to you for whatever reason. Well, what if you could move all of that to digital assets and find a way to keep them secure, stable, safe, fluid, global, and make the fees go very low? And instead of getting a loan from your local community, where it's 35%, you can get it across the world, and everybody can put a penny in, and then it adds up to 50 cents. That's why you'd want to use that, because you have total control over your identity, self-sovereign. You have total control over your reputation. You have total control over your asset storage, all of these types of things. That's RealFi at its core. And it's what gets me interested in this industry. When we say we want to be the financial operating system of the developing world, the new world that we're moving towards, that's really the point of it. Because you'll notice that each of these things, identity, metadata, governance, standards, and certification, are not controlled by a single government, a single individual, a single company. And in many cases, the assets that are produced there are owned by you, the user, as opposed to owned by a corporation, a transnational body, a standards body, or whatever it may be. You see? And that is the difference in a nutshell. What is DeFi versus RealFi? It's RealFi is a superset of DeFi. It has added capabilities, and it has a very particular philosophy on the user base in that the user wants to use this. It's capable enough for the user to use this as their primary financial stack. You say, but Charles, crypto is very volatile. Well, it's true. Why we build things like algorithmic stablecoins and these types of things to try to figure out a way to skew the volatility. You say, but Charles, there are conversion issues and liquidity issues. That's true. And that's why people build on off ramps and these types of things. And there are forex fees and so forth. You say, but Charles, the DeFi applications aren't exactly where they need to be. And it's absolutely true. It's a new economy. And there's some warts and some stretches and rough edges and these types of things that are a little difficult to work with. However, the difference is, instead of this being an innovation of an individual or a company, it's an innovation of an industry. Meaning, the things I saw at Stanford Blockchain Week, I get to use. And the things we come up with at Cardano, they get to use. And so you have tens of billions of dollars of innovation that's basically working its way through. And we collectively are open sourcing all of that innovation. So within just a few years, the DEXs will be more efficient, faster, and have much better security guarantees than any of the centralized exchanges floating around. In just a few years, we'll have much better ways of representing knowledge, information, data, and its veracity than you'll ever get from a centralized company. In just a few years, many generations of stablecoins will work their way through. We'll have a much more nuanced way of algorithmically locking value and creating stability and very interesting community baskets. And all of these things, their cost goes down because once the innovation cost has been paid, it becomes a public good to everybody. And all of these things run on protocols for everybody. It's what gets me so excited about the industry and the space. And it's something that my company in particular is going to focus tremendously on in 2023 is RealFi. And it's something that we hope to be able to create an industry definition for and move us beyond the degen DeFi movement into the age of RealFi. So I hope you guys enjoyed listening. Apologies about the tablet. I'll get that fixed up, and we'll do a whiteboard video, and I'll draw it all out. Cheers.